Greetings, fans, and welcome to the SOS podcast. This is the week of Monday, February 9th, 2015. I am Adam Thomas alongside Steve Resnick. Please do give us a follow on Twitter at the SOS podcast. Steve, how are you doing?
Not too bad. It's getting a little bit warmer over here, but
Yes, getting a little warmer, Steve. Definitely agree with you there. Let's jump right into the show, though, and we're going to start with the Super Bowl. The New England Patriots defeating the Seattle Seahawks 28-24 in fairly dramatic fashion. I'm sure anybody listening to this podcast would know the better details of that game, but just to remind the listener, essentially this game boiled down to Super Bowl worst all-time play call. Maybe something we'll chat about here in a second, Steve, but the interception on 2nd and goal from the 1-yard line, effectively ending that football game, giving New England the Super Bowl championship. Steve, your thoughts on this one, and how'd you feel about it?
yeah, definitely calling that fairly dramatic is a bit of an understatement. But it was finally nice to see just a Super Bowl that lived up to expectations, really. Just two really good teams and a close game. I don't think anyone really doubted the Patriots, and they were down 10 in the fourth. I think at this point, you give Tom Brady to the last second, and clearly to the last 26 seconds. It's what they needed, but came up big and really one of the Super Bowl games I think I'll remember for a long time.
Yeah, it was really a fantastic game. I have to totally agree with your comments there. I mean, the entertainment value was there. The back and forth was there. The never say never, the just dramatic, jaw-dropping, did they do that finish? We had a circus catch in there from Jermaine Kearse. The whole game was just awesome, and you're right. I think definitely one of the most memorable ones. And, maybe if we boil it down to that call at the end of the game, and I've had a few conversations with people about this, and, some want to say, oh, there was a pick here, or the circus catch there, this and that. And those things go another way. Other things don't happen, and we don't come down to this. But to me, it was three downs at the end of that game where everything was settled. The obvious culprit is Pete Carroll and or the play calling. But then again, Malcolm Butler made a terrific play on that interception. So, Steve, what side do you take on that, Super Bowl deciding interception play?
I'm not in the camp that it's the worst play ever called in the Super Bowl, but by no means do I think it was a genius, great play call. I mean, you're at the 1-yard line with a timeout, so you can run the ball with Lynch pretty much 3 times if you really have to. If you can get set up, you can call all the plays. They elected not to call a timeout from the run to the 6 to the 1. They let about 30 seconds go, and that, I think, played a huge part into this. And then you decide to throw it where it wasn't necessarily a bad play, although I don't think drawing up Kearse to pick both Browner and Butler was going to work out in any scenario. But to even where a chance like something could happen like that, I don't think you can risk that at that stage.
Yeah, I think there was some mismanagement on the clock. I agree with you there on the part of Seattle. First note. Second note before sort of get into it here. I don't think it was all the play call. You got to give Butler credit on the play. He made a great play, and that has to be said before I get into what I'm about to say, because I'm probably going to really rip this play call. But it was a great play on his behalf. Now, those 2 points aside, I think from a sheer strategic approach, with your timeout, with the time left on the clock, there was time, 26 seconds. As you mentioned, you can run the ball at least once with the timeout, maybe even a second time if you're smart enough about your play calls. But do you not just run the ball from a strategic perspective to preserve the 3rd and 4th opportunity in that series of downs? I mean, it's very unlikely you're going to fumble the ball in that situation. You have a reliable, experienced running back in Marshawn Lynch. A safe play.
At least even have Wilson just roll out with the ball.
Sure,
So
run your
isn't
lead
the
option. Exactly. I totally agree. And this play call killed me, because you completely sabotage your attempt at your 3rd and 4th down on this drive by making this decision. Again, the likelihood of a fumble, I think, very small. The likelihood of an interception, maybe it's 1 in 3. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But I just think you shoot yourself in the foot What if Marshawn Lynch crosses that goal line? I'm not saying he does, but it's an option. Pretty good one at 1 yard out, I would think. Steve, I'll give you a second to speak on some of that, maybe.
I mean, again, I don't think it was the worst play call ever. It just, again, Butler made a great play to intercept that ball, and he clearly knew or had an idea what was going to happen. He said earlier in the week he was beaten on a similar play in practice, and he had an idea that when they lined up that way, that's what was going to happen. So respect and credit there to Malcolm Butler and also Bill Belichick. But at the same time, I think it could easily have been the other way where pass is incomplete, they run it in the next down, and it's a completely different story. So I don't think it's the worst play call ever, but just the situation, the timing, what's on the line. I think how you don't run the ball, you're asking to be questioned for eternity at that point.
Yep, and I think it's something Pete Carroll is going to live with, despite all the justifications that he and the team have come up with, et cetera, since the play. Just the way it's going to be. But we'll end it on a lighter note. How long are you going to remember the name Malcolm Butler?
Ooh, it's gonna be a while. I'm sure a lot of people got their easy headline in the Butler did it post Super Bowl. So I'm sure, and especially because he probably won't demand that much money yet, I'm sure you'll see him around in the Patriots secondary for a long time.
And follow up, is he on David Tyree level in terms of longevity?
Ooh,
I haven't forgotten that name yet.
I think Javon Curse would be there if Seattle had won, maybe even higher
Fair
because
call.
that catch was ridiculous, and now it's just basically a footnote. But it's a tough one. I'm not sure on that one just yet.
Well, I think Malcolm Butler might stick around for a little bit. You're right on that, and don't know if he's David Tyree level because that was just, oh wow, what a play that was. But anyway, maybe this one just as great. Time will tell, right? Of course.
If Brady wins another one next year, it's probably remembered more as just multiple championships than that. But we'll see.
Absolutely, and I think we should give a little nod to Tom Brady as a Buffalo Bills fan. It's not my happiest moment to see him come out on top, but the guy's got 4 Super Bowls, 6 attempts, the all-time leader in touchdowns thrown in the Super Bowl, his 3rd Super Bowl MVP. He did have a great game. I can't take that away from him. So once again, I'm going to eat my pride and watch Tom Brady lift his damn Super Bowl trophy. But we'll go on from there. And Katy Perry.
Of course. And Left Shark. Can't forget
Left Shark. Well said. So a shout out to Left Shark and Katy Perry for making our Super Bowl halftime enjoyable as well. All right, so let's chat a little Blue Jays MLB action. We're going to take a few minutes to dissect sort of this presidency situation in the Jays organization with longtime outstanding employee Paul Beeston sort of being humiliated in a very public, I think Steve is the only way to comment on it, search for ultimately what would amount to his replacement. Just to catch some of the names up in the story here, so GM Dan Duquette of the Orioles, he was sort of courted by the Jays. Things kind of broke apart. Beeston obviously became aware of these, attempts to find a replacement. Later, the names Kenny Williams of the Chicago White Sox, Terry Ryan, also mentioned. Maybe never came as close as Dan Duquette, but certainly very public process, ultimately resulting in Beeston being re-signed for 1 year, only to potentially retire, I suppose, at the conclusion of this year, as it's being told. Steve, are you feeling as awkward about this whole thing as I am?
It's definitely a weird situation. Being a bit younger, I don't really have that iconic view of Beeston that maybe some older Jays fans would. I haven't really seen him produce success in my lifetime, and especially the last few years. I mean, this was supposed to be. He said within the last 5 years, the Jays would make the playoffs 3 times, and this is year number 5 where he's got his chance to make it the first time. I'm a bit on the other side of the fence where I'm sure at the end of last year they had a conversation with him. Hey, we're going for a replacement. We clearly aren't re-signing you. I'd assume once he realized that, he would ask them, "What's my situation?" So it's not like he was completely blindsided by this. But at the same time, you have to realize when you're Rodgers, or at least the upper management of the Blue Jays that if you're reaching out to his friends to try and overtake him without getting, maybe you don't need his explicit permission, he doesn't work for you anymore, but you might want to at least ask him, hey, we're going to reach out to this guy. Like, are you okay with that? But at the same time, I really don't think, I mean, no matter what it comes down to, you got to go back to success. And I just don't think Easton can really use that as leverage considering how the Jays have done in the past little bit.
Yeah, for me, this whole thing's just weird. And at the risk of being called an old person here, I will take a second to let you know that Paul Beeston from Welland, Ontario, the first ever employee of the Toronto Blue Jays. I don't know how you do this to the poor guy. Like, what's happening? He's coming back for a year. He's retiring. Is he not retiring? Did you mislead him? Didn't you? Where do you find out? When do you find out? The whole thing's a mess. Offline, we were chatting, and you mentioned it was the perfect Toronto upper management fiasco, and I couldn't agree more. Hopefully, this doesn't really tarnish his image, and I don't think it will. It's kind of just a strange way for it to end. But we got Josh Donaldson, Martin as well coming in this season, so maybe this team's got some potential. Hopefully the year ends well for him. I think we'd agree on that, right, Steve?
Yeah, I think we're all cheering for the Jays. They reloaded their Canadian content, so they've got that back going for them, and I think they've got a couple pretty cool bobblehead days coming up this year. I read in the paper, so if they've got nothing else to hype up, they've at least have got that.
I think the one thing we all need is another Jose Bautista bobblehead. So I'm happy to hear that. And on that note, let's go Jays in 2015.
Welcome to the National Hockey League.
Then you have the Toronto Maple Leafs.
The home ice advantage is actually a disadvantage.
Ottawa Senators.
If I was an Ottawa Senators fan.
Kessel had a couple goals.
A late goal by Ryan off a nice pass from Carlson.
Gotta love the Habs.
Suarez looking to be a dominant player again.
All right, so let's jump into some NHL chat here. We're going to open up with a quick note on the All-Star game. So Steve and I officially split our prediction for predict and pick. I took the game itself while Steve took the skills competition. So we thought we'd spend a moment talking about the All-Star game and how to come off in your eyes, Steve.
I mean, from the actual gameplay standpoint, I don't think it's too much unexpected in terms of the lack of defense and how the game played out. That being said, though, I think overall the weekend was, from a fan's perspective, someone not in the host city, who's not going to the events or anything, but from a fan perspective with the fantasy draft and the skills, I thought it was a bit better than in years past. I don't know if that really has anything to do with Rogers' production of it and more of maybe letting the athletes be a bit more loose-lipped, but I seem to enjoy it. I wasn't expecting, a 2-1 intense game by any means, so I didn't have any problem with it.
Yeah, and it is what it is, and I think they've actually done a good job. They make it fun and interactive and approachable, especially for the younger generations and all that, and with Ovechkin and trying to win the car to donate to charity, that gets the name of the whole thing in the news for a positive reason. And I loved when they pulled out Johnny Gaudreau in the skills competition as the child participant or young participant, whatever they called them. That was kind of hilarious. So there's some nice points. And, they filled the net on game day. I was kind of surprised in the end. I know I had Team Tays, but I thought they might just find a way to get the hometown Foligno a win. But for my sake on our predict and pick, I was happy with that ending. So good there. And I guess, in closing the All-Star game, it kind of is what it is. And I think they do a good job with it. But over to some quote-unquote meaningful hockey. The Toronto Maple Leafs and Ottawa Senators sinking to new season lows in both regards. The question for both teams on the heels of Coach Horacek of the Toronto Maple Leafs talking about the give a crap meter needs to be elevated a bit. Question of the day, is it time to blow these teams both up once and for all for this season, move forward?
I think for the Leafs, you're already past that point. I think it's just you're figuring out what you can get in your trades, not if you can get anything back. You have to ship guys out. You got to get rid of friends and when they extend anyone on an expiring deal. you got to get assets for, and you've got to move some of the core even. Bozak, I think, is probably going to go. Maybe not the deadline, but I think one of the bigger contracts will probably have a serious chance to move, at least at the draft, and Kessler Phaneuf, if not both. And I think you're at the point where the Leafs need to seriously consider just completely blowing up everything and looking at an eye to the future, and not the future being next year, but maybe 3-4 years down the road.
Yeah, and I look at this, and I mean, you see their massive losing streak. They've got a couple wins to mark the calendar year here so far, and it's not pretty. There's no chance, neither for Ottawa or Toronto, in my belief. You're looking at jumping Florida, Philly, New Jersey, bumping Boston, bumping somebody. It's not happening. So realign, figure out what your best approach is for the remainder of this year, with the future as, probably your end goal. And I think in the case of the Leafs, and you mentioned a handful of names, we have Bozak, JVR, Kessel, Phaneuf, Bernier, maybe Franzen, Gardner, Kadri, Clarkson. Like, do all these guys need to go? Do some of them need to go? Are they scarred at this point from their experience in Toronto? Like, can this group win? It's been a handful of years for the better part now with these players as your leaders and your core group, and there's just been no change. Steve, I know you and I are kind of the same thought about this, but at this point, why has there been no on ice adjustments? You've gone through the whole front office and the whole coaching staff, et cetera, but is this front office going to make a change on ice? And why is it February 11th and we're still waiting to see it?
Well, I think one reason for that is Shanahan just coming into the job this year wanted to really get as much of an evaluation as he could as to who fits in and who doesn't, and maybe going forward with his systems and what he sees the team being, who he thinks will produce in that. But I think you are going to see, especially if they don't do anything at the trade deadline, a lot of negative feedback from the fan base, even more than already. But the main question I think most people have is, why is Dave Nonis the one to do this job? He's clearly the one who brought in everyone. Every single contract on the Leafs right now, aside from JVR's, was signed by Nonis. Like, this team is almost 100% his, and clearly he has not done an adequate job. And I just don't know why you would let him handle another deadline, even if he's still obviously working in tandem with Shanahan and Dubas, etc.
Yeah, it's kind of the elephant in the room, is sort of everybody else around has moved, but seemingly what we're told as a public perspective anyway, Nonis would be kind of the keystone that assembles, what you see, and he is the one guy who has stayed put, and maybe you wonder if his future, although I guess they have sort of re-endorsed him, if he at some point will be considered movable as well. But maybe I'll flip the question, Steve, for a second. So of that list of names, all the way from Kessel to Kadri and everything in between, are there any of those players that are salvageable to you? Do you want any of those players, or are you willing to wholesale, if the right offer shows up, gone?
I mean, aside from Morgan Riley, I think you listen to options for everyone, and if anything is worth the value to you, I think you do it. I don't think you're going to get any. No one's taking Clarkson. That contract is too bad. He's stuck here. But I think for anyone else, you definitely consider it. Morgan Riley, I definitely would not trade, especially when the team's been awful this past month and a bit. He still looked very good, if not the best player. So I think you would keep him. But other than that, I think you try and change as much as possible. You're not making the playoffs this year. The fans, they're honestly cheering for loss at this point. You may as well just strip it down as much as possible and go into a full rebuild, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I like Riley as well. I still hold out hope in Gardner maturing, but I wouldn't be surprised if he goes. I just picked him up in a trade in my fantasy pool on the hopes he is going to get moved. I think you make probably at minimum 3 moves. The first 3 that come up out of that list, barring maybe a Riley or a Gardner. I wouldn't include Bernier there. I know I mentioned him loosely before. You hadn't commented on him, but I wouldn't include him. I still have a little bit of faith in him with a better team. But I think you make 3, 4, 5 moves of a quote-unquote blockbuster nature, if that's what it's called. You move on from this group. I don't see any reason to think the story is going to change with this set of players. Let's jump to the Senators for a second. It's more or less the same story in terms of their situation in the standings. So this year is out the window. That's established. It's my belief, I think that fans, folks that I speak to, I think we've kind of accepted this. I don't know if we're full on the McDavid bandwagon yet. I'd say it's probably about a 50-50 split. Some folks do still want to continue to push. I don't know what the deal is there, but they're not as many names in Ottawa, I think, that are looking to be moved and are considered movable parts. I mean, I don't think you sit there and don't listen to an offer, but I don't know if it's quite the same as Toronto. A couple names though, Marc Methot, since returning from his injury, he's certainly helped Carlson. The eyeball test will show that Carlson's been a lot better the last 10-15 games. I think Methot has a lot to do with that. Maybe Dave Cameron as well. But does Methot go? He's got the contract situation coming up, and that makes him eligible to move if they can't get an agreement done. But I might like to see him stay, to be honest. I think he does help Carlson. Chris Neil, of course, a fan favorite in his 13th season now. What do you get from him in 2-3 years when this team's sort of ready to make a more legitimate move? Not sure if you get a whole lot, but I don't think you want to insult this guy unless he gives you go ahead. You hang on to him. There's other names floating around. Maybe Craig Anderson could go either way. Guy's obviously a very good goaltender, and he helps Ottawa when he's playing for them, but do you sell high, try and get some assets, and maybe turn to Robin Lehner? So why don't you have a comment there, Steve? Methot, Neil, and Anderson.
Yeah, I definitely think there are some pieces there, and you will see Ottawa make some moves. There's no point in keeping some of those veteran guys when you probably are going to start going in a new direction going forward, and who even knows if Dave Cameron's going to be the long-term coach there. We'll see. That being said, though, I think unlike some other teams in the same situation, Ottawa already has a pretty solid group of young players that are actually playing in the NHL already, in Lazar and Stone and Hoffman. So they're already a bit one step ahead of that, in that they're getting adjusted to the program. They're already there. So it'll be less of a challenge moving forward for them to go with the youth movement, I think.
Yeah, and you mentioned Stone, and it kind of brought a smile to my face there. I think he's been a real strong player. Ottawa's not getting results every night necessarily in the win column, but Stone's looked really good over the last little stretch here. He's probably not the leanest, thinnest guy out there. He's got a few extra pounds, a little weight to him, but he's looking like he's grown into a man. He's playing some good hockey out there. He's getting a lot of shot on net, a lot of post, and maybe finding a little hard luck, but I like the future of him and a few of the other names you mentioned. So I think you take your chance. Hopefully they do keep Methot. I would move Neil if the opportunity was there. I think he can get you something in return. I think with the play of Leonard, maybe you do consider Anderson. He's kind of shown over the last handful of games with Anderson out that he's held his opponents to 2 goals a game for most of those contests. The problem for Ottawa has been finding a few goals on the offensive side of thing. And as a quick side note, I don't know why Mike Hoffman is not playing on the power play. I lose my mind thinking about that. But our leading goal scorer sees no power play time virtually at all. But anyway, I guess we'll wrap it up there. You mentioned Evander Kane and some of his thoughts maybe on the Winnipeg media, so we'll chat about his part in fairly blockbuster deal here between the Winnipeg Jets and Buffalo Sabres. There's a few extra pieces, but the main names I think to consider here, Evander Kane heading over along with Bogosian to the Buffalo Sabres, and in return the Jets get Tyler Myers, the towering defenseman from the Sabres blue line. Your first thoughts there on this deal, Steve?
I think it was inevitable that Kane was going to get moved, whether it was now to a team that is not looking at this year, or whether in the summer to a lot more other options than people saw this coming. For Buffalo, I think it's a great move. They actually get worse right now, which is better for them in clinching last place. Evander Kane should fit in nicely there. It's not like he's an old guy. He's 23. He'll fit in with that team. I don't know if he's too happy about moving from Winnipeg to Buffalo in terms of weather-wise, but he seems excited for a new start in a big role. And on the other hand, I also think it's a good trade for Winnipeg. They did not have that much leverage. It was pretty clear that that relationship was done. They got Myers for Bogosian. I think that's a pretty even trade-off. A lot of potential there on both sides, but I don't think too much is going to change in the future between the two of them. I think they'll both be pretty comparable. And you get some good prospects a first-round pick, it's obviously not going to be first overall. It'll be late 20s. But I think overall, a good trade for both sides.
Yeah, I like some of the movement here. For me, the three players between Kane, Myers, Bogosian, they've all sort of showed, pardon me, these flashes of brilliance in what are still relatively young careers, especially on the blue line for Bogosian and Myers. A good defenseman can play 15, 20 odd years if that's the caliber they truly are. I don't know if they are that, but again, they've shown some flashes, and I think both those players to reset is a good thing. I'm a little bit more skeptical when it comes to the name Evander Kane. Again, had a nice 30-goal season. Hasn't been able to recapture that form in subsequent years. I had a look at some of his line mates, and I think the quality of his line mates has deteriorated since that 30-goal year. So maybe if you give him some players to play with, he can be more productive. But for me, the questions come up on the locker room side of it, and a lot of this, just negativity surrounding Evander Kane and the whole situation. Not even, I don't think, just from this season, to be quite honest. This has been kind of a recurring theme, and I think hit a fever point with Byfuglien and the other guys tossing his clothes in the water in the shower and all that. Is he the personality in the locker room you want with a young team such as Buffalo? I don't know if I'm sold on that. Steve, what are your thoughts?
I'm not too against it. I mean, it's not often you're going to be able to get a player like this at his age and still with a pretty manageable contract, and you've got him for another couple of years. I think if you're able to make that move, you do it. You get Connor McDavid, you have them. That's a pretty good 1-2 punch up the middle, 1-2 punch on your first line. And going forward, you've now got Evander Kane to add to your top six, and your depth that'll now include one of McDavid or Eichel up the middle, Sam Reinhart, Girgensons, and Grigorenko. So I think if you're Buffalo, getting a potential elite, hard-checking big winger is a very good move for them. And at the expense of a first-round pick, which they have two others that'll be higher for them, I think it's very good for them. And I don't have an issue with Evander Kane and his off-ice issues. I think if the team does well, it's not going to be an issue.
Well, you make a persuasive argument, Steve. I don't know if I'm willing to take the gamble, but like I said, you do make a good argument. That roster, if McDavid does end up in Buffalo and he turns out to be, anywhere the player that he's projected to be, if you can give him a winger who could score 30 goals as a kid, let alone when he hits his prime, it's a smart move. I just hope for their sake it doesn't derail the locker room, but only time will tell there. So we'll see what the Sabres can do it. Hopefully they don't get McDavid. Love to see him here in Ottawa, or even heck, I'll say it, Toronto. That would be an awesome storyline.
No,
how could they possibly destroy the native to Toronto on the Leafs in 5 years or less? I'd say.
whatever spot the Leafs vacate out of on the last day of the season. So if they win and go from third to fifth, or if they lose to go from fifth to third, that spot is what's going to win. I can already assure you that is what will happen.
Fair enough. Well, we'll find out in a few months if you're right on that one. That'd be an awesome prediction there, Steve. But yeah, let's wrap up our hockey chat there for the day. Okay, so let's spend a little time talking about the Toronto Raptors. They still sit second place in the conference. Steve, I think it sounds like I've been repeating myself show after show here. Really not much has changed. They're 7.5 games back of the conference-leading Atlanta Hawks. A few games ahead themselves of third place Chicago, with Washington and Cleveland rounding out the top five in the conference. So we thought we'd talk a little bit about the Raptors and their peers on today's show. So Steve, do you want to lead us off? Is Atlanta to you the consensus number one in the conference?
I think they're definitely going to finish with the 1 seed, a 7.5 game lead, especially with how the rest of the East looks. I think is pretty insurmountable, and especially with the way the Hawks play, where they don't really depend on one player. So if anyone gets hurt, probably isn't going to do too much overall to the team. That being said, though, I'm still not convinced that they're surefire to make it out of the conference and represent the East in the finals. Cleveland is really coming on strong since they made those couple trades to get Mozgov, Shumpert, J.R. Smith even. And I think the Bulls you always got to be wary of. That's a team for the Raptors I would not want them to face. I think the Raptors, while they're definitely in that top 4, top 5, if you want to get Washington in there, the front court of Chicago is definitely an issue for the Raps, and something that if they want to win the East, I think they have to address that, knowing that they have to get through Chicago to do so.
Yeah, and I like Atlanta's mix right now. I mean, they're a great shooting team. They sit second in the league in field goal percentage, first in 3-point percentage, sixth in free throw percentage. So that's a recipe for winning championship basketball. I think, but like you said, once the playoffs draw in, anything can happen. So I won't say they escape the East necessarily, but I think at this point, with the cushion they have, no real reason to believe, with a third of the season left, they'll drop off, or any of these teams will surge past. So let's pencil them in at number 1. You mentioned Chicago, Toronto. I've got them at 2-3, kind of alternating between. As you mentioned, Chicago, it's a physical team. It's a big team out there. Upper tier in offensive and defensive rebounding, as well as block shots. And maybe that's Toronto's weakness, is hanging in there with a big front court like that.
Yeah, especially because not only do they have the big guys, but they run a lot of their offense through Gasol, through Noah, through even Taj Gibson off the bench. So you're going to have to get guys who not only can play them, but can stay with them and stay in the game and play those minutes. And I don't know if Dwayne Casey even has that confidence in his guys yet to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, if you want to quantify it on one maybe quick number, the Raptors, they sit 5th last overall in defensive rebounds per game. Total rebounding, they're 9th last. Bottom third of the league in block shots, as well as block shot attempts. So, I mean, if you're looking for a defensive presence that can compete with that kind of front court, you're not finding it right now in Toronto. And I think that does point to, if you want to be a legitimate contender, I think you do have to make a move. If you foresee playing a team like Chicago, and there's a handful of them littered around the league that can run that kind of game, probably on the Toronto unit right now. So I think you maybe do consider a move. Looking at the teams maybe just a hair below, Washington and Cleveland, I've kind of got them at a toss-up. As you mentioned, Steve, Cleveland is surging very hard. Sorry, go ahead.
You're never going to want to play LeBron in the playoffs. Like, it doesn't. It could be LeBron and 4 guys from the Monstars.
Well, this is,
and just you would not want to play LeBron in the. It doesn't matter who he's with. You just, especially as a Raptors fan, knowing that you haven't beaten a LeBron-led team where he's been in the lineup since before he went to Miami. You can't have that happen.
No, exactly. And I might have Washington a hair ahead of Cleveland right now, just because they play a little bit overall, have a better team game maybe than Cleveland. But, Cleveland's still got that fresh roster. They're going to continue to get better for years to come. So that's, a positive for them. Everything they're doing this season is just, it's gravy on top. But it goes to show, if LeBron wants to go to another level, this team that I have ranked 5th here in the Cleveland Cavaliers, I have no problem putting them up to 1st if LeBron James wants to do what he can do. We'll see if it comes to that, but I think that'd be my top 5 there. Doesn't sound like we disagree on too much here, Steve. So we'll see if the Raps can hang in there at 2nd. And as you mentioned, or sort of alluded to, I think the one thing we're both fearful of is they drop to 4th or 5th, or something does turn out a little differently. Then you might end up with a real tough matchup, and I don't think we want to see that going to the playoffs. Am I right?
Definitely not. I think if they can get even Milwaukee, who's a very underrated team, but more likely they can get Charlotte or a sub 500 team that gets into the bottom of the East playoffs, that is exactly what they're looking for to get that second chance in the second round in franchise history.
All right, good stuff, Steve. Well, it's been a power episode here. We're at 37 minutes, so why don't we try and tie a bow and wrap this guy up? We will finish up with our predict and picked for the week. So just to recap last week on the Super Bowl, we were both correct. My score, I was actually rather impressed myself there, Steve. My official prediction, I can't recall if I made it on air, but I certainly made it to you and others. I said 28-25 Patriots, with them scoring in the last 3 minutes to win it. I did not predict Pete Carroll passing the ball on second down or any of that, but it was pretty close on the score.
Just thinking of the amount of money that was potentially won or lost because of that play is crazy.
Dude, think about the potential money I could have won or lost. I should have gone out to a few bookies and said, boys, 28-25, it's going to happen. I was right there. But anyway, was not to be. So anyway, we're both right there. We had the Leafs and Sens, y'all might recall. And the Sens gave them a nice, I believe it was 2-1, Steve?
4-3.
4-3.
It was 3-0 after the first.
2-1 was Buffalo.
The Sens felt pretty bad, so they let the Leafs score a couple goals, and then they decided, all right, enough's enough, and you stay where you stay.
Yeah, it's beauty of a game there. Way to go, Ottawa.
David Clarkson did score that game, so I didn't give myself a half point, but I considered it.
All right, well, I'll let you have that, but I do get the win on that one. And then for
sure.
the All-Star game, as alluded to earlier, technically a tie. In my lower moments of life, I might consider this slightly my advantage, with I think the game being a little bit more important than the skills competition. But Steve, I'll let you have it because you sit at a hideous 1-7-1 on the year.
I think you just saying you're up 3 works just as well.
I am a robust 4-4-1. I will not have my record laughed or mocked on this show. All right?
I'm in no position to be mocking records just yet.
All right. So that's where we stand. For this week, we're going to do a little Hockey Day in Canada special segment. Featuring the 3 All-Canadian games. Our sincerest apologies to the Winnipeg Jets, but you have the Detroit Red Wings, and we're not going to comment on your game. So to lead it off at 2 p.m. this Saturday, Edmonton visits Ottawa. Steve?
I am actually going to take the Oilers here. No Taylor Hall, which obviously not going to help them, but they do play well against the East. They seemingly do well whenever they play in Ottawa, and I like their chances for that, unless they decide to go ultimate tank job and just bench every single one of their legitimate NHL players. But I will take Edmonton.
I'll never say never when it comes to Edmonton, but we will differ on this one. If the Toronto Maple Leafs could beat the Edmonton Oilers, Ottawa can do it. If Edmonton can put an end to that historic losing streak, I think Ottawa can get the win here, so I'll go Ottawa. We'll split on that one. Next up, Les Maple Leafs versus Les Habs in Montreal. Steve, who do you like?
I am again going with the underdog road team.
Wow.
The Leafs, for whatever reason, they do play well against Montreal, whether they lose by 1 or end up winning. And for whatever reason this year, Montreal is just awful against terrible teams. They went 0-3-1 against the Sabres this year. So I'm mainly banking on that to go with the Leafs in big Saturday night win.
Well, you're certainly bold, if nothing else there, Steve. I'm just going to play the odds here and take Montreal. I really am not going to say
it's tough to argue that. It's tough to argue.
Carey Price, he's just, I think he's an MVP candidate right now. He's certainly a Vezina Trophy candidate. All that aside, obviously Montreal, it doesn't go without question. They've got the better roster. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll cop out with the easy pick here and take Montreal for the win.
A team that has Dale Weiss on their first line, I can't commit to them just yet.
Well, you know what? And the Leafs are often very spiteful when they show up here in Ottawa playing a rival team, and of course, the rivalry between the Leafs and Canadians as good as any. So let them maybe play the role of spoiler, and good luck to you. But going Dale Weiss and the Habs, bud. All right, and the last one, the late game of the evening, Vancouver visiting the Calgary Flames. Like, how good is this team? Steve, take your pick.
Yeah, a lot of people, I think, expect them to drop off by now. They have not. I think a lot of Toronto fans were wondering how come Brian Burke can do this year. But that all being said, I'm going to stick with the road teams on Hockey Day in Canada. I'm going to take the Canucks. Miller had a very rough game earlier this week. I think he's going to want to bounce back. He's definitely getting that start, so I'm taking the Canucks.
Yeah, one of the articles I took a look through this week was Feast or Famine in Vancouver. Either they're pretty much shutting the door and Miller's getting a shutout, or you have one of these 4 or 5 goal nights. But I'll take the home team. You know what? Let's go 3 for 3. You're going away. I'll go home. We'll get some movement in the standings between you and I this week. I'll go with Calgary.
Dear.
I'll go with Calgary. I'm as shocked as anybody, and I'll be the first to say I was kind of expecting him to fall off, but the heck with it. I'm taking Calgary for the win. All right, Steve, so that is the end of another awesome episode of the SOS podcast. Your closing thoughts for today?
I'm feeling confident in my picks. My previous record to date should not allow me to do so, but I'm feeling good about it. Feeling confident that we're going to see some pretty good trade action in the NHL pre-trade deadline, as is normally the case, and hopefully the Raptors just continue status quo and hum along in that number 2 position.
Yeah, I guess we'll start to settle into a little bit of lull here in Southern Ontario with the Leafs and Sens seasons probably wrapping up effectively on March 2nd trade deadline.
As is the norm here.
A little less common here in Ottawa, I'd like to think, but certainly with no meaningful results. But I think both cities be keeping a close eye to see who moves in, who moves out, if anybody does move in, and if anybody does move out, I guess, on that note. And so we'll call it a show there. Thank you, Steve. Always a good time with you, bud. And thank you, everybody, for listening out there. Take care.